From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Workers in Costa Rica have been protesting for 4 weeks now against a fiscal reform pushed by the government. Both sides have failed to reach an agreement this Sunday to put an end on the ongoing strike. Unions say they shouldn't pay for the cost of the economic crisis hitting the country. Our correspondent in San Jose, Fernando Francia, tells us more.
The third week of the open-ended strike, called by workers of the public sector, has come to an end in the midst of dialogue attempts with the government. Workers are protesting against the fiscal reform proposed by the government that's currently discussed at the Legislative Assembly. Trade unions and workers are asking the government not to make them and the most vulnerable sectors pay the cost of the fiscal crisis the country is facing. The government has proposed a package with 4 bills that are under discussion. Workers are urging for a national dialogue to modify these proposals and for measures to avoid tax evasion. Protests, different events, and some road blockades continue.
Bolivians are disappointed after the International Court of Justice ruled against Bolivia in its claim for access to the sea. Hundreds gathered in capital La Paz to listen to the final decision. After the court stated that Chile was not obligated to negotiate, Bolivians say they were sad. But they also say it is not a defeat and that the country should keep fighting for access to the Pacific Ocean.
It has been an injustice to the world. Today Bolivia feels a little sad, but not defeated. Bolivia was born with sea, and sooner or later, Bolivia will have sea again.
From now on, the work we're going to have is to strengthen ourselves in all areas and recover it as Chile has done. We have no other way. We have to look for other instances to recover what was historically ours.
This sentiment was echoed by President Evo Morales when he spoke from The Hague after the decision.
With paragraph 176, the court understands perfectly that there's an unresolved issue between Bolivia and Chile. There's no obligation, but there's a need not only for these 2 countries, but for the whole region to resolve this issue between Bolivia and Chile. Bolivia will never stop fighting for access to the ocean.
The president of the court ruled that Chile has no legal obligation to negotiate with Bolivia sovereign access to the sea. He said the judges had reached this decision by 12 votes to 3, but he added that this ruling doesn't prevent the 2 sides from continuing their dialogue in the spirit of good neighbors.
The court cannot infer from the content of these resolutions, nor from Chile's position with respect to their adoption, that Chile has accepted an obligation to negotiate Bolivia's sovereign access to the Pacific Ocean.
For his part, Chilean President Sebastián Piñera also spoke about the resolution.
The ICJ has served justice and has put things in their place, clearly and categorically establishing that Chile has never had any obligation on the matter of international rights on its relationship with Bolivia.
Our correspondent in Bolivia, Freddy Morales, brings us more.
The hopes of the Bolivian people were dashed when the ICC ruled against the Andean nation in its dispute with the neighbouring Chile over access to the Pacific Ocean. After 5 years of deliberation, they truly believed the International Court would resolve the feud, dating back to the late 19th century. Since early morning, thousands of people have gathered in this square, anxiously awaiting the word on the resolution. The court's announcement that Chile was not obligated to negotiate granting Bolivia maritime access was met with bitter disappointment. It caused large crowds to disperse. Only a handful of Bolivians remained in the square. Some, however, adopted an optimistic outlook. They say that the Constitution ensures that the Bolivian people can continue their legal fight for sea access. After its defeat by Chile in the War of the Pacific, Bolivia lost 120,000 square kilometers of land and became a landlocked country. People gathered here have told us that they believe the country must remain united as they push forward on a solution. Vice President Alvaro Garcia Linera has said that the tribunal has closed the door, but there are other windows of opportunity still open to Bolivia in its search for an amicable solution.
That was Freddy Morales from Bolivia. In a last-minute deal, the United States and Canada have reached an agreement to replace the North American Free Trade Agreement as a trilateral pact with Mexico. Canada will give U.S. dairy farmers access to around 3.5% of its nearly $60 billion domestic dairy market. However, the two countries failed to strike an agreement regarding U.S. tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum exports, salvaging the $1.2 trillion open zone trade zone from collapsing. The three countries plan to sign the new U.S., Canada, and Mexico agreement at the end of November.
This is too important, what we're doing. One of the most important deals and the most important trade deal we've ever made by far.
Speaking to the members of Parliament, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said the deal to modernize the North American Free Trade Agreement is good for Canadians.
What we've moved forward with in terms of labor standards in North America is historic in terms of protecting the rights of workers. What we've moved forward for on the environment is strengthened environmental protections and real consequences within the accord that had never been done before. We are moving forward in a deal that works for the middle class and people working hard to join it, and that is at the heart of the progressive agenda of this government and of this progressive trade deal.
Our correspondent Pablo Perez in Mexico City has more on the story.
So we say goodbye to the North America Free Trade Agreement and hello to the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, or USMCA. That's how they call it already. Early this morning, the Chancellor to be under the new administration, Marcelo Ebrard, made an announcement of how glad they are of the deals that finally ended last night between the United States and Canada on their part of the agreement. Finally, they got on a middle point on the so-called Article 19 about the controversy discussions, and well, we still don't know the details of the agreement. We hope they're going to be published along the day, but they say that the people on the new team and the people on the Luis Videgaray from the Enrique Peña Nieto administration, they say the new conditions are advantageous to Mexico, which is still to be confirmed once we know the details of the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again in a minute. Colombia's President Iván Duque has signed a new anti-drug decree. The measure now allows the police to confiscate even the minimum dose of marijuana, although its consumption was decriminalized in 1994. Critics say the decree is useless as it doesn't deal with the root of the drug trafficking, but it criminalizes consumers. Colombia is the world's biggest cocaine-producing country. Members of Argentina's Central Workers Union are campaigning outside the National Congress to protest the proposed national budget. They pitch tents outside the building where they vow to remain until Friday. As the national budget is said to be debated throughout the week, they're demanding that the government put an end to the price hikes and budget cuts. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Hernando Esteban, has more.
Protesters have been mobilizing throughout the day and will continue to do so for the rest of the week. State workers assembled in front of the Parliament building. They're rejecting the proposed law outlining the 2019 national budget. If the inflation rate exceeds 23%, this constitutes a recession. This is according to International Monetary Fund's demands. Workers aren't having it. They have taken to the streets to stage various forms of protest action over the next few days. They are also rejecting the agreement between Mauricio Macri's government and the International Monetary Fund.
A government commission in Mexico has recognized the Tlatelolco student massacre as a crime of state. In October 1968, a student demonstration was violently repressed, leaving 30 people dead, according to official figures. But relatives and activists say the number of deadly victims is close to 400. Mexican President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador paid tribute to the young people killed in the massacre.
50 years after the 1968 repression of the youth, in 3 days it will mark 50 years. Here on this historic square, on the Three Cultures Square, we make a commitment to never use, ever again, the army to repress the Mexican people.
Felix has returned here to the Plaza de las Tres Culturas in Mexico City, almost 50 years from the event that changed his life and the entire nation as well, the so-called Night of Tlatelolco. Here the state repressed with violence the student movement of which he was member of, something that was engraved in history.
People know that here at Tlatelolco, a crime against humanity was committed. A crime of genocide remains unpunished.
The violent event, in which armed and paramilitary forces participated under the president's commands, left an undetermined number of dead people, but also marked the future of social and political movements in the country, which are prepared today to pay tribute to the victims of the massacre.
The commemorations organized by student movements are also protests that follow the slogan, "The victims of 1968 are remembered."
Throughout the city, more than 100 events are planned to remember this historical date. This exhibition used images which during those years were not able to be published because of the government's censorship to explain the student movement.
We are helping other people to understand why the movement was so revolutionary. They really tried to change things. We are remembering the 100 glorious days, 3 months of struggle and resistance.
President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador recognized the importance of the anniversary and made a commitment to obtain peace.
Here, in this historical plaza, la Plaza de las Tres Culturas, we make the commitment to never use the army again to repress the people of Mexico.
During the 50th anniversary of Tlatelolco massacre, several social organizations will carry out a demonstration to the Zócalo Square, chanting, "October 2nd will never be forgotten."
Brazilian Workers' Party candidate Fernando Haddad visited former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva in prison on Monday, 6 days ahead of the October 7 presidential elections. The candidate and former president met in prison. Lula has been in jail since April, facing a 12-year conviction that made him eligible to run for president. The latest polls reveal Fernando Haddad is in second place behind the front-runner far-right candidate Jair Bolsonaro. And on Sunday, the candidates held another televised debate. Several of the candidates paid tribute to the millions of women who marched over the weekend. They were opposing far-right candidate Jair Bolsonaro, who leads in the polls. Bolsonaro left hospital at the weekend after he had been stabbed while on the campaign.
It's about defending democracy and defending the rights of women, of workers. This is very important for democracy and for Brazil. Brazil needs to discuss the future, and people are going out into the streets to take ownership of the future.
When I saw Brazilian women agitate and occupy Brazil's streets in their millions, I thought, there is something very healthy, very strong, very beautiful in my country despite a fraction which is civically ill.
More than 200 cities in Brazil hosted demonstrations over the weekend against the presidential candidacy of Jair Bolsonaro. In São Paulo, 500,000 people marched.
Brazil saw one of the biggest mobilizations of its history. Women called for people to take to the streets to protest against far-right presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro, who is leading the polls.
We must defend democracy to fight against sexism and racism. These are not part of our diversity. Candidates like Bolsonaro are racist, fascist, and sexist. He said that if he is elected, he will not do anything to defend indigenous territories, that black people are useless, and that women will have to be paid less than men because they could get pregnant. We have to react now.
The massive event was led by the Workers' Party vice presidential candidate Manuela Dávila and Marina Silva, presidential candidate for the Sustainability Network Party.
The main objective of this event is to show that we will not accept a candidate that spreads hate against any minority. We are people from all kinds of political backgrounds. Each one has its own ideals, but we are here together to reject any type of negative behavior. We are not going to vote for a candidate like him.
At the end of the event, several women read a manifesto in response to the attacks of Bolsonaro and his neoliberal government program.
We are not going to vote for a fascist candidate. We are going to have a democratic process, not only through women's voting, but all of us who are part of this movement today, not only in Brazil, but also worldwide.
The organizers called for a new demonstration on October 7th, the day of the presidential election, using the polling stations across Brazil to say no to fascism.
The Jamaican government has announced a fundamental economic shift by targeted inflation. According to Prime Minister Andrew Holness, there was too much focus on stabilizing the US dollar, which negatively impacted their foreign reserves.
Trying to keep the price of the US dollar stable. Now that comes at a cost. To keep the dollar fixed costs the country in reserves. Because whatever price you try to hold the dollar at, the dollar will only stay there if you have dollars to sell at that price. What we should be doing, and should have been doing this a long time ago, is to focus on keeping inflation, which is the cumulative measure of prices in the economy, stable. And so we have made a fundamental shift in our economic policy from trying to, keep a fixed exchange rate to now inflation targeting.
An increase in the Dominican Republic's public debt is worrying its citizens.
The increase in public debt in the Dominican Republic is raising concerns. Experts say conditions are becoming more complex ahead of future negotiations.
Dominican Republic's debt is becoming highly worrying because 73% of the full debt that the country has is in bonds, that is, in financial documents that we could have to negotiate with many people to save it at the time of its complaints.
Over the last 6 years, debt has increased to 68%. That represents 54% of the gross domestic product. Taking into account the interest rates, this could become a grave issue.
The central bank keeps borrowing money that the people have to pay back. Every year, 70 billion pesos are put out to pay the interest of that debt, with 14% of interest rate.
External debt has reached almost $21.5 billion as of July 31st, and domestic debt reaches almost $10 billion. This is an increase of $4 billion compared to 2012.
One of the most worrying issues is the debt linked to the central bank, as a consequence of the bank crisis of the years 2003 and 2004. This is a ballast for the government because every year it has to invest 14% of the GDP of our central bank.
According to experts, the increasing of debt is becoming a serious issue for the country. The government will either have to replan its budget or keep investing in its debt payments in order to avoid default.
Sunday marked what would have been the 27th birthday of Bohan John, killed by police in Dallas on September 6th. Family, friends, and supporters held a Thanksgiving birthday march and ceremony in St. Lucia to mark the occasion. About 200 activists also attended a forum at the St. Paul United Methodist Church in Dallas for what was designed as a call to action.
I don't think we will be at peace internally because the case goes on, and we would have to be flying out to Dallas when we are needed up there. Our lawyers will keep us abreast. So I see a long, drawn-out situation, difficult moments. I would have really loved it to go to end now, but I know this is not the way things happen, and I suppose we will be grieving for a very long time.
A Brazilian surfer has set a new world record for the largest ever wave surfed by a female. Maya Gabeira has established a new Guinness World Record by riding a giant 20.72 wave. Gabeira's achievement took place in Portugal, the same place where she nearly drowned back in 2013 after being knocked unconscious while competing. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back. Protesters have fought running battles with South African police in protest against the police failure to curb gang violence. The protest erupted following the fatal shooting of a woman who was caught in the crossfire of a shootout between rival gangs. The residents have accused the police of failing the community and working with drug dealers.
Our children are dying each and every day now. The police are doing nothing about the drugs and everything. That's why we're protesting now.
Hundreds of swimmers in Senegal have participated in the Dakar Gore Island race. The competition pays tribute to the former slaves who didn't want to be sold on the Gore Island. It is said that they used to jump in the water and try to reach Dakar swimming. Now professional and amateur participants swim 5 kilometers to the former slave port. Palestinians in the city of Ramallah held a general strike against Israel's controversial nation-state law. Life came at a standstill in these areas as shops were shut down. Government and financial institutions did not open while businesses and schools suspended classes. The strike also marks the anniversary of the deadly October 2000 clashes in which 13 Israeli Arabs were killed by the Israeli police at the start of the second Intifada.
The strike is against the policy pursued by Israel in order to erase the Palestinian nationalism and the displacement of citizens from their land.
It's 1 year since the October 1st referendum on independence in Catalonia. Thousands of protesters attempted to block roads and train tracks in Catalonia. Others marched in Barcelona to mark the anniversary. The vote in favor of independence led to a heavy repression and a constitutional crisis with the Spanish government in Madrid. At least 9 pro-independence leaders remain in jail. Our correspondent in Barcelona, Joan Ortiz, was at the demonstration.
This is the demonstration called for by the platform of universities in favor of independence. They want to go to the center of Barcelona to support the mandate of the referendum on the 1st of October last year. 2.3 million people voted then. 2.1 million voted in favor of independence, which was then proclaimed but was never implemented. There is a number of simultaneous actions in the city this Monday, not only involving students, but also the committees in defense of the Republic. They have been blocking roads in Barcelona and across Catalonia. At midday, there was a call for workers to stop work for a few minutes and take to the street to support the result of that referendum. And more protests were called for the afternoon, with a large rally at the end of the day outside the Catalan parliament.
China is celebrating the 69th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. Major cities in China have been illuminated with colorful lights. Traditional festival lamps hung along the Lanhu Lake, creating a festive atmosphere for visitors. Chinese citizens living across the world are also celebrating the day. Our correspondent in Beijing, Isaura Diez, brings us more.
The Golden Week in China has begun. It's a government initiative designed to extend the celebration of the National Day of the Republic, which is celebrated on the 1st of October. Over the next few days, the Chinese will be traveling within the country to spend time with their families, boosting internal tourism. On October the 1st, 1949, China's Communist Party declared independence People's Republic of China after years of fighting foreign powers. October the 1st remains one of the most significant and important dates in the Chinese calendar, even though they have 5,000 years of history. It marks the transition from occupation and war to a global world power with one of the fastest growing economies. On Sunday, President Xi Jinping paid tribute to the heroes of the Republican at the Monument for Dead in Tiananmen Square. Earlier on Monday, another event took place in the square in front of thousands of people where members of the military raised the Chinese flag.
And we come to the end of this news brief. These and many other stories you can find at our website at telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.
The ruling world order has always subjugated the masses.